We will get the meeting going, and I will officially open tonight's meeting of the City of San Diego Commission at 7:01 is what I'm showing. This is Monday, September 28th, 2020. And we will start with a roll call.
Commissioner Carlton.
Present.
Commissioner Lasowski.
Here.
Commissioner McLean-Wenzel.
Present.
Commissioner Logan.
Here.
Commissioner Mobley.
Here.
Commissioner Mayton.
I'm here.
And Chairman Crosby.
Here. Okay, we had in our packet the draft minutes from the August 24, 2020 meeting. Any additions, corrections? I had one observation. If I can get to it here. The format has changed a little bit. It is just like under roll call, the list of who's there is up at the top under roll call. It says that I opened the meeting. Is that just a change of format? I'm used to it a little bit different.
Yeah, that's pretty much what the system will allow me to do.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not how I would like to do it either. When I send it out in Word or the PDF to you guys, you probably see that it's different than this. It's more the traditional way. But yeah, this is kind of what it will allow me to do, as much as I can figure it out at least.
Okay. Yeah, I wonder if you could change the roll call in going forward to call to order and just count the commissioners present as being considered the roll call. Would that help you?
I mean, we could. The problem is, I noticed on a few meetings in a row, I didn't have, the system doesn't have any, which is really bizarre. The system doesn't have anywhere that automatically you can add when the meeting began, which is like a really weird thing that you would think like a system that is for meeting minutes would have. So I can tinker around with it and see if I can get it to look any different in the future.
Anybody else have a question, concern, anything that needs to be changed on the minutes? If not, we'll take a motion.
Move we approve the minutes.
Second.
Moved by Don, seconded by Todd to approve the August 24, 2020 minutes. All in favor, say aye and wave your hand.
Aye.
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 Okay. Minutes passed and approved. This is a time in each of our meetings where we give opportunity for just general communication from anybody in the audience, which tonight would either be via Zoom or telephone. This is opportunity for someone to speak to the Planning Commission on an issue that is not on tonight's agenda. If you are on Zoom and you want to speak, you click the little raise hand icon and then wait to be recognized. If you're on the telephone, dial *9 to raise your hand and wait to be recognized. And Kelly is the observer of the crowd, so he will tell me if there's any response.
Yeah, you have one person with their hand up right now. It's somebody named Rick and Donna. So what I will do is allow them to speak, and then if they can repeat their name and address for the record. Whoops, I asked the wrong, hold on one second, sorry. Something screwed up here. Okay, they should now be able to talk.
All right, Rick and or Donna,
Okay.
give us your name and your address for the record, please.
This is Rick and Donna Threadgill. Our address is 37957 Hamilton Ridge Drive in Sandy, Oregon. I can see all of you lovely people. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes.
You can?
We-
Oh, great.
We can hear you
Okay.
fine.
Oh, good. Okay. My wife and I want to express to you our thanks and gratitude for allowing us to address this commission and really sharing how the apartments have affected our lives, our privacy, and the selling of our home. And also a little of what we hope to someday accomplish for our community, even though we have been informed that there is nothing that can be done at this time. And we understand that. From our experience living at our address, it would seem that somehow any forethought of future consequences to provide a modicum of privacy living so close to three-story apartments, nor the homeowner's ability to be able to sell their homes for appraised value was ever anything more than considered. And I make such a statement not with any feeling of anger or any hidden agenda. We only hope you would appreciate our point of view and how we have been affected by our city planners. Before the apartments were being built, the house directly across from ours sold the day it was listed for appraised value. Since then, the homes that have sold are those that are not directly affected by the massive looking apartments being 15 feet away from, well, which from where we are, look directly into one of our bedroom windows. As our realtor has shown, or will show here in a moment, and this year I think have already the handout that was given maybe, we tried to sell our home, which we bought new in 2007, now for the last 6 months. And since this weekend, 33 families have said no, as our realtor shows, with the primary reason stated, because of the apartments. This does not include those who have made appointments, driven by and viewing appointments called, or viewing the apartments, excuse me, they called and canceled. The two offers we have had were anything from $30,000 to $35,000 below our appraised value. The home built with the floor plan exactly like ours, but having a smaller lot sold at appraisal within 2 weeks of listing. That home, as our realtor shows, is about 3 blocks straight down our road from the apartments. We just wanted you to be aware of what has happened to us. My wife was offered her dream work opportunity before retirement in Tucson, Arizona last March. We have not moved because we have not been able to sell our home without losing so much hard worked for equity in our home. We had no idea the very planning of our life would be so much affected in such a negative way by what the city has allowed to be done to one of its own. We remember the words used by Planning Commissioner Ron Leswowski and Mr. Gintz at the meeting we attended on November 13th, 2017, to see more privacy screening for neighborhoods, having a 3-story apartment building next to them, and come up with the best solution, especially along the western perimeter, to ensure proper screening for the neighbors. Also, at that meeting, the commissioner suggested that homes would not be affected. Please come to our neighborhood, our home, with those words in mind and see for yourself how the privacy situation has been handled by whomever is responsible, city or IE or both, or now just the IE. I believe you would agree, if you were our neighbor or not, that idea has not been even nearly accomplished. Everyone has said your home is very nice, lovely even, but we cannot abide with those apartments looming over. From sharing with those who should know, and this is what I hope to accomplish. If buyers had the understanding that whomever is responsible for continuing to work toward tenants and homeowners having the privacy they deserve, that promise would go a long way in not only the selling of our home, but the beautifying of Sandy's neighborhoods. We thank you for this opportunity, and we hope with all sincerity that even though papers have been signed, the welfare of our people is still a priority. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll cover something on that in my director's report.
Okay. Do you see any other raised hands?
Yeah, I was just giving it a minute.
Okay.
There's 3 other people. I believe one of them at least is here for the OAOR, but I don't know who the other people are. So I'll just give it another 10 seconds here or so. With that, I don't see any other hands.
Okay, Kelly, then we can move into your director's report.
Yeah, so before I jump into the staff report that I prepared, this is a staff report that I prepared at the request of Commissioner Lisowski. But before I move into that, I just wanted to give you guys a couple brief updates. So you probably saw an email that I sent earlier. It was in regards to a code of conduct for boards and commissions that was recently passed by the city council. That's being sent to all boards and commissions. So the sooner you can read through that 4 or 5 page document and return a signed copy to Jeff Aprati and myself, that would be very helpful. City council is going to require that any existing board members or commissioners complete that form, and that in the future, any new board members or commissioners also complete the form. So the form was created, it was a council goal to create that and to have some code of conduct for how people act as far as when they're on the commission, both during meetings and outside of meetings. So if you can just take the time to look through that in the next week, fill that out and return the signed copy, I'd appreciate that. I've already seen a couple of them come in. Then the other thing I was going to mention as well, somewhat related to that, is we have 3 commissioner openings happening at the end of this year. That's for Mr. Logan, Mr. Mobley, and Mr. Mayton's seats. I've reached out to the 3 of them, and it's going to be similar to the previous process from a couple years ago. Any current commissioners, if you're interested in continuing on the commission, you'll just apply through the city website, and I sent the link to the 3 commissioners. And then what the city council has decided to do is also open it to the public. So similar to last time, they will accept applications from both current commissioners and anyone else, and then they will look at all the resumes and all the applications, and then hold meetings in November with the different candidates. And then in early December, they will most likely have a recommended list of who they want to appoint or reappoint. So for the 3 people that are currently coming up, I would encourage you to reapply if you're interested. And if not, I understand as well. But so we're just going to be doing it basically the same as we did it last time. So I just wanted to kind of remind everybody, and anybody that's listening or anybody that hears about this that's interested in planning commissioner seats, that you can apply for them, even if the 3 people decide to stay on the commission. They're just going to open it and, I guess, take the best applicants available. I wasn't actually involved in the interview process last time. I don't know, Jerry, if you want to say a few words about that, how that happened, because I think you were involved last time.
Oh, I can't remember if I was or not. I've been interviewed myself. Most even it seems every time that my term has come up, I've been interviewed by some subgroup. Maybe not every time.
So I think, so just so you guys know, I believe, don't hold me to this, but I believe the interview committee will be 2 city council members, Chairman Crosby. So that might be news to you. And I think the 3 of you will forward on recommended appointments. I might attend the interviews, but just to answer questions, I'm not going to be one of the people participating in the recommendation of the appointment, just similar to last time. So with those 2 things, the only other thing I'd like to cover before I jump into the staff report is Rick and Donna Threadgill's comments. I mean, I sympathize with them. If their realtor did reach out to me, I believe it was this morning, and I said that we would welcome that they come and speak tonight, but that at this meeting we would not be able to make any decisions or move forward with any enforcement. What I can tell you though is I'll be looking into it with I&E on how much screening they've put in and if it's adhering to the conditions within the final order. So I will be looking into it. One of the first things I would ask Rick and Donna Threadgill to do is if they wouldn't mind, is I would really appreciate them to reach out to I&E as well. Because as you all probably recognize and realize that when property owners do it in addition to staff, it puts a little bit more pressure on the adjacent property owner, in this case I&E, to kind of get with the program and probably put more landscaping screening up. I have not been back there by their site in probably at least a year, so I don't know how much growth has occurred with those trees, but I will go check it out. So I sympathize with them. It's kind of an unfortunate circumstance. The zoning where they live, as we've all talked about, and the zoning where the apartments are both R3. So I&E, when they proposed their apartments, they had every right to build them to the height they did at the setbacks. So now it's just trying to work with both I&E and the neighbors and try to put more screening in over time if we can come to an amicable solution on doing that. That's my hope. So I just wanted to give you guys a brief update on that. I don't know, are there any questions on that?
Only that I guess I'd like to reinforce, I appreciate them talking, and that they indicated they had been at the hearings, and that was good. We talked about that a lot, and I think the commission had tremendous concerns about that west side that was there, and I remember even talking to David, about that. We could have anything in our code that we can use to require screening from the apartments to the outside. We have stuff that requires screening the other way. Like, for example, you have to screen on top of a building for if they put an air conditioner up there, right? So that's kind of looking at something from the outside in. We were looking the other way. So kind of back to your code change ideas. I mean, that was one that we talked about that time, and I believe David indicated, well, it really wasn't much, we could do, because those people on the 3rd floor decks obviously would be able to look down. They have a height advantage, and we all proposed several thoughts, but we knew that was going to be the case. And like you also said, fortunately or unfortunately, it was all R3, and when people buy, they have to kind of understand that what might go in behind them, regardless of what the realtor says, given Jerry what he always says at the beginning of a public hearing. That's the case. So the city didn't, I just want to emphasize, people think, oh, the city allowed that. The city didn't allow really anything other than it was zoned R3, had been all that way, all of it was. We did our best to try and mitigate the consequences of the application to the benefit of those people to the west. But, the developers have rights also, and, they can develop that land. And so that's just the way that one is. And I hope that the screening can come up with either natural vegetation or whatever, to where people cannot view into the backyards from the decks on the west side.
And just one other note, if I remember right, is there was some concession. We asked for, it was both east and west sides of the properties because the same height advantage is in play on the east side as well. So.
Yeah, I guess we just
Sure,
have to look, Kelly, we have to look at what the final order said in terms of what they were supposed to put in there.
Yeah, it's true on the east and west side. That's definitely was one of the conditions. The great thing about the east side is by the time they graded it and lowered the elevation of the site, the first floor is below the lot
Oh,
to the east. So actually the second floor is at the exact same, almost the exact same elevation as the first floor of the houses to the east. So it's basically just like you're living up next to a two-story home. The west side, unfortunately, is not that case. So the apartment, Mr. Threadgill is correct in that the apartments sit higher than the houses, especially on the west side of the property because of the natural terrain. Okay, with that, I'm going to jump into the staff report, just so we're not talking about this all night long. So I put this together, like I said, at the request of Commissioner Lasowski. I think it's a great idea to start kind of looking at all of the needed code changes that staff is aware of. So there might be some additional things that Planning Commission wants to look into, but these are kind of this is kind of the base or the bare minimum of the code changes that I want to start exploring over the next year or two. Some of these are going to take a while to get to, I'll just be very honest. So I kind of rank them in order of most important or very important, moderately important, and least important. And not to say any of these code changes are not important, it's just some are more pressing than others due to either state regulations that are requiring it, amendment violations that are currently in one of our code sections that I'll explain here in a minute. And then even more so, a few of these are really council goals or council, they mentioned these to me, last council goal session. So last January, February, we just haven't had the opportunity to look into them. So on the very important list is House Bill 2001 code modifications. These are being mandated by the new House bill. These are for middle housing for cities over 10,000, but less than 25,000. We have to, in accordance with state law, adopt new modifications by June 30th, 2020, or our code's basically not valid and we have to use the state code. So it's very pressing in that sense, because I think we want to have the ability to control what our code says. So we're going to be having a work session on this next month at 6 p.m. And I think I sent a reminder to everybody. So that'll be a virtual work session. And Emily's going to be presenting the proposed code changes for the 4 or 5 different chapters. And then she's going to be explaining which changes are required by state statute and which ones we do have some flexibility or some allowances on. So as you'll see next month, some of the code changes are strictly required. We don't really have any say. Some of them, it's going to be a policy decision on what we want to adopt. So we have to adopt something, but how we adopt it is kind of open. The next one's sign code modifications.
Kelly, could I interrupt? You said June 30, 2020. Did you mean 2021?
Yes, I did. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, did I type 2020
We're really
in there?
behind.
Yeah, 2021. So the next one are sign code modifications. We've been working on these for on and off for about 3 years. So there's going to be a lot of changes. And some of the changes are just to make the sign code a little bit more flexible. Some of them are to make it a little easier to understand and read. And some of them, strictly speaking, are legally required. We have a bunch of free speech issues within the existing sign code regulations. And I have not been enforcing those sign code regulations, but they're still written in the document. So that's not going to be reviewed by Planning Commission because it's outside the purview of Planning Commission, but it's going to be going to council on October 19th. So if you have any time or any interest in looking at what we're changing, I would love to get feedback from you. It won't be going to you, but I would still love to hear feedback from the commission, especially anybody that owns a business here in Sandy. Wink, wink, Ron. So I would really like you to kind of take a look at those and see what you think. I think overall they're going to be a much easier approach to getting sign permits.
Are you going to send those out to us?
I can send you a link to the work
Seth.
session staff report. Is that
That'd
what
be
you're
great.
asking?
Thanks.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I can do that when, so it's gonna be on October 19th at City Council. I'll send you a link to that agenda.
Oh, thank you.
We've been, I'll just say on that one before I move off of it, we've been working pretty extensively with Barry Elsner and Hammond over the years. I don't think, at first with David, but I think more recently with Mr. Crean. So they've been pretty involved in trying to clear up any of the free speech issues that are currently in our code. I want to get those out of there. The next 5, I believe, or 6, I'll just move through these more quickly. Moderately important codes changes. So the urban forestry code, which we're all very aware of, and it needs to be modified. The last time we held a meeting for that was October 2019. So it's quickly approaching a year. Sandy style code changes. The city council has asked staff to review the Sandy style standards. And so I've been working on those off and on for almost about 7 or 8 months. There's not going to be a lot of huge changes, but there will be some that I'm hoping that will reduce construction costs and also allow the director to have a little bit more flexibility on allowing some of the smaller deviations that we continue to see. And on some of the requests that we see on every application to just modify the code, because obviously they're not working if every single applicant asks for the same variance or the same deviation. The next one is the food cart code. It was written by my predecessor. It's written very well. It's actually one of the best ones around the state that I've come across. There's just a few small tweaks we want to make to it. And the only reason why is because we've now been doing food cart permits for 3 years, and we've seen some areas where we can make the process a little more streamlined. So that's just, the code changes there will just basically be a reflection of using the code for 3 years. But again, not a lot of big changes. Fences, windscreens, retaining walls. I think we talked to the Planning Commission about this. I looked back in either 2015 or 2016. And the idea with this one was to allow a combination of fences and retaining walls to go above 8 feet in certain cases due to topography. And instead of making them go through a variance procedure, we would have something, and as you can tell, I have not worked this all out, but we would have something in the code that if they meet certain thresholds for topographical changes, they would actually be able to go over the 8-foot requirement for the combined height. So we're going to be working on that, but we've had some interest in resolving that for quite some time. It's just a very complicated issue to resolve, and there's not a lot of good codes out there to take examples of, but we're going to be looking into that one. The next one is residential allowances in the C2 zoning district. This is actually a planning commission led code modification. When we brought, I think it was a year, oh wait, November 2019, that's when it was adopted by the city council, but I think it was either September or October 2019, the planning commission forwarded a recommendation to adopt basically mixed use with residential above commercial in our C2 zoning district. We still actually do have an applicant that's going to be most likely moving forward with this concept. So I still think it was a really good decision to adopt the code. It's just that due to COVID, their sale was put on delay, but they're back actually. And so it looks like we're going to have one of these in our C2 in the next year or two. But if you remember, when you recommended approval to city council, you also recommended that at some point we come back and explore so that we could allow maybe some residential on the ground floor, but you guys wanted to look at kind of the mix and make sure that it doesn't start to consume too much of our C2 land. So we definitely want to bring this one back. This one will definitely be, I mean, most of these will be work sessions, except maybe the food cart one probably won't be. But this one will definitely be a work session. And before we even do a lot of code analysis or research on this one, I really want to bring it to as a work session, just kind of talk through it with you guys and kind of see what you even want. And then after that, then we'll kind of go to the drawing board and create something for you to look at. And then the last one on the moderately important is the parkland and open space. This one's actually being done right now, from what I understand, by ESA, the consultant that we hired for the Parks Master Plan. So they're looking into modifications that can be made to that code chapter, and then they're going to be forwarding their recommended code modifications to the Planning Commission and staff for review. So I don't know if this one will be a work session or not, but I'm hoping it will be, so we can kind of talk through the implications of what they'll propose. The least important that I'm aware of right now are the dark sky ordinance, but we do want to adopt something to bring in LED lighting options into the code, because right now we're just kind of allowing them, but there's nothing actually in the code regarding LED lighting. So we'll probably be looking at model dark sky ordinances, just because I think that's most likely the best thing to do. Major utility siting standards, that's for cell towers. So it's different from the 5G stuff you guys just recently looked at that Shelley brought. This is actually the larger towers and kind of reassessing how we approve those. Drive up uses, we think it needs to be updated to include new use types and double drive-through lanes. So right now, like McDonald's, for example, we kind of do our best to determine what the requirement should be, but more and more fast food restaurants are having double drive-through lanes, so we think we should just come up with a standard. And then the definition section would be the last thing. So what typically you do when you do a lot of code changes is then you kind of go back to your definition section and see if there's anything else we need to define throughout the code. So with that, I didn't know, is there any thoughts on any of these, or any, do you guys think I have the importance ranked right? Is there any code sections you think I'm missing? I'd just like to hear what you guys think about that.
Kelly, first
Kelly,
of all,
quick question. Who's going to be this? Kelly?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Who's going to be the staff that oversees the urban forestry piece? Is that going to be Emily, or did that get changed? I'm just wondering who's going to call that meeting to get us going again.
Yeah, it'll most likely be Emily. Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I'll be involved on most of these, but I'll only probably be leading the charge on a couple of them. Probably Sandy style, because I've been the main one looking into that for the council. But a lot of these will either have most likely Emily or Shelley assigned to them.
Kelly, I want to say thanks for taking the time to put that together. It helps me and hopefully helps the rest of the commission. I think you've done a good job prioritizing them. I've got a couple little tiny ones that I'll just email you and you can figure out what to do with them. And we had talked before about, as we go through the code, to kind of gender neutralize some things if we come across it, things like that. But without having to go through everything. And then the other one is maybe to add to the ones that are higher up on the list, like you did for the House Bill 2001, if there's a due date, you know, that if something that's driving it, I mean, that's super, super helpful to me, or a goal date, like I said, for the trees and trying to set that something to work towards. But again, thanks to you and staff for putting that together.
Yeah, the only thing I would just throw in, you know, I guess what I gathered, Kelly, you have the side code modifications up there is very important. It probably only be, personally, I think it's only because you have a work session coming up with the council. So it just kind of is the first thing on your plate. So I personally would prioritize like the urban forestry above that. I'd like to see it up as very important. It impacts every residential development that we have, and the residential developments appear to be ramping up per they were kind of prior to 2009 almost, maybe. So I like to see us run that one up a tree, because we've chased it around the tree for a good year and a half, and I think it's time to put a deadline on it and get it done.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. I agree. That should probably be in the very important. I mean, part of the reason why sign code's up there is because, like I said, we've been working on it for over 3 years. So at some point, I'm like, man, if we're gonna go forward with adopting this, we need to get it going and just adopt it, because yeah, that's been going on about twice as long as the tree code actually. So, but yeah, no, I agree, Don, that the urban forestry section is very important.
Maybe when you get the sign code one out of the way, you just move everything up and just always have 2 in your very important category.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good suggestion, is to have something like that. I mean, as you guys are well aware, is that we're almost always working on a code change. So we just got the annexation one done, and then we just got the ADT standard stuff done, and now we're moving into House bill. So I think that's a good goal, is to always pretty much have one or two in the hopper.
Well, this is great for me because it kind of gives a roadmap of where we're going. And I know things will pop up in the road from time to time that weren't on the way, but this is a great help.
Yeah, in fact, I would encourage you, Kelly, to this kind of be a living, breathing document that doesn't, we just keep. And as we go through, if something pops up, that we agree to put it on the work suggestion, we'll decide where to put it. You follow me? But I mean, since you said you're always working on code changes, then this document ought to be something that always is in existence, that we can continue to add, shuffle priorities. Because we all know, you've told us this many times, your first thing is the 120-day clock when something comes in, right? So we know that you have other things to do. But if we don't ever write them down and have them in front of us, we just quite never make it.
Yeah, no, it actually, I'm glad Ron asked for this list, because it helped me kind of start to prioritize. I had all these written down, but they were in different places. So it helped me kind of prioritize and put a list together. So no, I agree. I think it should be maybe what I'll do is make it like a Google Doc in the next couple of weeks and share it with everybody. And as we kind of, as the House bill stuff's passed, then that kind of comes off, and then we'll put new stuff on here. Honestly, we never knew the House bill thing was going to be on here a year ago. Same thing with, Sandy style. I didn't know that was going to be something we'd be looking at, before a year ago. So it's just, things evolve, and as you said, priorities change. So that's just how it works.
Mhm. Any other general discussion, comments, questions to Kelly?
Well, I had one briefly on the code of conduct, backing up to that. It says boards and commission. Does the board also include city council members? Or I would assume they're signing it as well.
David would have to answer that, but I don't think they fall under the same requirements or regulations. They're not appointed members, so they're elected officials. So even though it would be, I think most people would agree that it would be good if they followed the code of conduct that they helped write, I don't think legally they would have to in most cases. I mean, unlike gifts and stuff like that, of course, but if they were more vulgar or more outspoken and it violated the code of conduct for boards and commissions, I don't think there would be any real consequence for an elected official. David, correct me if I'm wrong on that.
To Ron's question, no, it doesn't apply to them. And as Kelly said, it's directed towards appointed board members, commissions. They do have, as most councils do, council rules that have very similar sort of deal with sort of similar issues. The reality for elected officials is that basically, except for charter language that might say something specific, removal is really through the recall process. I mean, that's just how it works under Oregon law. So it is different for elected officials. That's true.
Well, I had a couple thoughts on that one too. I was kind of waiting to maybe Jerry do it in the next section, but since we're bleeding into commissioner discussion anyway, David, that was my first question. I'm not at all concerned about the legal part. I understand how elected works. It seems to me like if the council wants their boards and commissions to act in a given way, that they would voluntarily agree to act in the same way. If it, forget the removal part, forget all the rest of that. So, and be honest with you, I would think that the council would also put together one that would be there at least that what's expected of the public when the public testifies in front of any of these boards or commissions. That if it goes beyond kind of that the chair then has an opportunity to say, look, it's kind of out of bounds. So I'll be honest, I looked at it and it like came out of the blue, number one. And so I kind of was surprised that it would seem like as a matter of courtesy, they would have talked to us to let us know they were working on it. If you weren't paying attention, if I wasn't paying attention to the council's agenda, I wouldn't even know that they were voting on it. You know, we just found out tonight. So I have some concerns that way. I also have concerns, you know, they indicated in their staff report for them that, you know, they prioritized most of this stuff off of like Tigard or another municipality. And I mean, plagiarism plus form of flattery, and I don't have any problem with that as long as it applies to Sandy. But when I read some of the words that are in the first bullet, they seem to be quite subjective. You know, they chivalry, professionalism, and decorum. You know, you're not allowed to be belligerent, personal, slanderous, threatening, abusive, disparaging comments. All of that is subjective, David. You know, I can say whatever I want, and how you take it is how you're going to feel. So, I'll be honest with you, when I first looked at it, it looked to me like they're putting something together so that if they want to, they can get rid of some board or planning commission member because they have an excuse now. Others, what was the objective? The objective, and Ron and I talked about this a little bit, to be honest. You know, what are they trying to solve? What is the objective? The objective is just to have civil dialogue and, you know, have a civil meeting and all the rest, not a threat of being fired, not a threat of anything. But words, you're in the legal profession, and you and I know that all those words I just mentioned to you, you'd have a heck of a time, you know, with. You know, on a legal.
Well, I think also though, Don, one of the fundamental things about, you know, the nature of where you sit, other board members sit, commissioners sit, is that, you know, there is an element of subjectivity, and people that sit on boards and commissions are doing that basically as an extension of the council. I mean, in every case, even the planning commission. And it's probably least applicable with the planning commission because the planning commission has so many decisions that it makes that may never get to council. But all of them can, and some of them you're making recommendations. So you're a little unique in that way where you make some decisions that never get there. Other commissions, they're all being done as an extension of council. So I think it's a little bit different in terms of I think every elected body has the right to say, hey, we have a desire for how boards and commissions operate. And I think some of that is going to be subjective in nature. It's politics, to be very candid with you. I mean, I don't mean that with a capital P. I mean that there's always going to be an element of, do we feel comfortable with a new group of elected officials? Do they have the same beliefs or faith in the people that are sitting on boards and commissions? One of the downsides of not having anything is that then you get into this vacuum of, okay, well, what standards apply if we have concerns about people and how they're, you know, acting or behaving? How do we reel that in? Can we reel that in? So I don't know if there's ever a perfect time to do it. You know, I don't know what the discussions were beforehand and how it was rolled out, but I think more as a matter of just sort of general governance and having something in place, having standards like that are pretty common. The rollout probably maybe could have been different. I'll grant you that.
Well, I need to think about if I'm going to sign it or not, Kelly. I'll tell you that right now. And it's how the words are written. It's the process, and it's the lack of commitment of the council to abide by similar decorum and to require that of the public. We just endured several months of attacks on one of our council members, and he quietly sat back. Those are personal. So I don't understand why the public can personally attack council members during testimony, and we just have to sit back there and smile and say, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, they do have free speech rights.
They have free speech rights.
Well,
then that means we have free speech rights. That means all of these words about belligerent, whatever.
Yeah, let me finish though. So if a particular person felt that it was going beyond free speech, that individual would typically have to make a decision on whether they want to move forward with a case of slander or anything like that. I don't think the council in the 3 cities I've worked for would typically get involved with free speech and decide if that's being slanderous or not. I'm not saying that you don't have a legitimate point. I'm just saying that in the situations I've observed for the 3 cities I've worked in under numerous councils, is they typically wouldn't get involved in that. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that that's typically how it's dealt with.
I guess the feedback to the council would be, I wasn't, because of the short notice, first of all, David, we weren't told, nobody was said anything. The day of the council meeting, I just, because I get the email, I open it up and I look at the agenda and I pop in and I look at this, oh, holy gee, look what's on the agenda, and I
You'd
wasn't
have to
able to
reach out to the
participate.
city
So
manager.
it was the lack of involvement, number one. And
No,
they
that's
need
fair.
and they
Yeah.
need to consider, though they can't necessarily do removal part or whatever, it seems like there would be commitment on their part to abide by the same standards.
And I think that's,
I was just
think
gonna say,
that-
you might want to reach out to the city manager or the city recorder. My understanding is if you choose not to sign it, then that could be reason for removal on a board.
Sure, I mean, if I didn't sign it, I'd resign at the same time. I mean, no problem.
Well, I'm not trying to say that, Don. I'm just letting you know that that was what I believe was the intention. That is, if they chose not to sign it or refused to sign it, that it would most likely lead to removal. But again, like I said, you'd have to clarify that with Jordan, because I'm not sure if that's the case or not.
No, I mean, if I didn't sign it, I wouldn't remain on the council. There would be no reason to,
Any other discussion things?
The only other thing, Jerry, I'll try to make this short. I sent you and Kelly an email a month or so ago, and it goes along with a theme that I've been concerned about for over a year, and that is that we'd be really clear at the front part of a topic when we have a decision to make. What are the criteria that we are to evaluate to decide on approval or not? For variances, it's in the code. Remember, I asked on deviations, and Kelly said, and David said, well, we really don't have any. Well, maybe that's something we ought to put in the code. If you're going to have a deviation, you should have some criteria to decide if you're going to approve it or not.
That was a deviation from what section? You mean chapter 90, the Sandy style?
When we talked earlier, David, we were on one of these things. We got variances, we got special variances, and then we had like deviations. And I recall when we talked about, I asked, what are the criteria that we should be using? Usually it's like 10%, 20%. There's something, and my understanding was there's nothing in the code like we have for variances that says, these are your 5 criteria or, 4 criteria that you go through.
Yeah, well, it depends. I think the only time I ever think of the specific term deviation, because that's the only time it ever comes up as I'm aware of, is in the Sandy style. And
right.
Kelly, correct me if I'm wrong, and that was written to be, I'll use a term that probably is not going to be a big fan favorite tonight, at least maybe with you specifically, Dom, but the deviations in that context are specifically meant to be very subjective, to look at it and say, okay, what's the overall intent of this standard? And if an applicant's proposing a deviation, is it generally meeting it? Because I think the recognition was it's really hard to come up with a particular standard, 10%, 20%. They're already so subjective as it is. So unless there's another part of the code that talks about deviations per se, that would have been the context for my comment, and that the standard is kind of, well, do you see it being met or not? Does the deviation meet the intent of the?
Yeah. Well, not to bore into that specifically. What my point is, Jerry, at the beginning of the meetings, you generally go through the code of conduct, you go through all those things, that's the standard spiel. Staff, I think, has done a good job in the staff report generally of listing what the decision criteria are, and then they actually go through and enumerate on it, you know, to show how they, if criteria is met or not. I mean, when we read it, it's there. So I'm not saying staff's done a great job. What I don't see is us making sure as a commission that we are very clear to that, or you're reminded of that at the beginning. But my other concern, Jerry, is the audience is aware of that. Because the audience, I think, thinks that we have all this discretionary power to do anything we want, and or, you know, et cetera. And you know, I like to use the term, you know, you're welcome to give testimony. Your 3 minutes of fame on TV, you use that frequently. But if your testimony isn't pertinent to the subject and to the decision criteria, you're just speaking, and it's fine, but you're not going to affect the decision. And, you know, we're always looking for testimony that are going to affect the decision. And on the applicant's attorney, if in their recap, always kind of reminds us of how they have met each one of those. But I see even some of our discussions, we kind of go off on our opinions, you know, et cetera. And I just like to see our discussion be shorter and focused on, have they met criteria 1, have they met criteria 2, met criteria 3. If they have, you know, many things should be approved. You may not like it, but it, you know, you don't approve or disapprove something because you like it or not. You do it because either they've met the criteria as set up in the code or in state law or wherever it happens to be. I just like that to be clear at the front part of when we're making a decision. Only that's on my mind, Jerry, is, you know, we kind of sail along, but we've kind of got into a contentious period. If I do, probably everybody will agree with me, and I don't see that changing. And so at least I like to make sure it's clear to everybody what the process is, because the applicant's attorney will definitely remind us if we don't. And, you know, we either go with that process or David gets busy.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree, Don, and I wasn't ignoring your message. I was kind of waiting. It was you made good points. I appreciated them, and I was kind of waiting. If you hadn't said anything tonight, I had a note to myself. I was going to mention it, and to everybody, what I'm going to try to do is when we start public hearings, is to, even though it's been in staff report and may even be mentioned by staff, maybe I'm not sure exactly when I will do it. I just want to try and focus our attention on what it is, what we are being tasked with in this particular public hearing. Some of that, or probably all of that, will be old news to Planning Commission members. But to Don's point, it is also being said as an education piece to the audience, to kind of alert them to, here's what this is. This is a design review. We'll be looking at such and such. This is not a such and such. So just to kind of keep us focused, and Don is right. We sometimes, without that focus, we just by human nature, and the fact that, to be honest, we work together well, and because of that, we tend to get off focus occasionally on stuff that's not necessarily, it's not bad, it's never bad, but it takes up some of our time. So I'm going to try and do a better effort of looking at each public hearing and trying to get us focused just as we're going into it. Not sure how that'll look, but I appreciated the comments from you, Don, on that. And that was my takeaway. I wasn't ignoring. It's just easier for me sometimes to respond with my voice and not my fingers.
Yeah, well, just for those who haven't been on the commission, just kind of to give you an example that's way off on the left, but when I chaired the hearing on the ARCO station on the other end of town, and that's, believe it or not, how many years ago was that? That's 7, maybe. The room was filled with every gas station owner and every owner of a coffee shop in town. because that was going to be the first gas station coming into town. And at that time, there was no drive-through coffee stands in Sandy. That drive-through was the first one. So I made it clear we had 3 things to talk about and variances. And, you know, the big question was, does that actually apply in that area? And so I made that really clear. So we sat there all night. We listened to when people stand up to say, we have no more gas stations in town and we need no more coffee shops in town. Well, thank you for your testimony, but those comments had nothing to do with our decision. I understand their feelings and all the rest, but the point is that, I mean, that was an extreme example of words, but wasn't a single person testified that actually testified to the criteria. It was all, we don't need any more gas stations.
Right, right. But we need to give them the opportunity to say it.
Oh yeah, we give them the opportunity if they're 3 minutes of fame to be on TV.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You ready to move on?
Yep.
We have one public hearing tonight in new business. And I'm going to pull out my notes here. And this is a recommendation to City Council kind of decision. So at 7:57, I will open the public hearing. And this is for Plan 20-025, Annexation, OAOR Annexation. Any abstentions from any commissioners? Okay, nothing seen or heard. Any conflicts of interest from anybody? Okay, nothing seen or heard. Any ex parte contact, including any specific site visits beyond driving by on 211? Okay, nothing seen or heard. And for those that are in the room in the public, again, just to go over, when we do have the opportunity for public testimony, and we'll offer it in 3 sections, either you're for the proposal, or you're against the proposal, or you are neutral and have some comments to the Planning Commission or for the record. If you are participating by Zoom at that time, you click the raise the hand button and then wait to be recognized. If you're on the telephone, you dial *9 to raise your hand and then wait to be recognized. If you testify, you must raise all the issues you wish to address at this hearing. Although this that's sort of not true, because there will be another hearing on this issue before City Council. If your issue is not raised at this hearing or the next one, you may not be able to raise it later in any appeal. Your comments should state why the application should or should not be approved, or include your proposed modifications you believe are necessary for approval according to the standards. If you do not raise specific issues at the final evidentiary hearing or by close of the record, or fail to provide statements or evidence to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue, you will not be able to appeal the decision to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that particular issue. Any party may request that the hearing be continued to a later date, or that the record remain open after the hearing is closed. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to the proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. And we will move to staff report.
Hey everyone, let me just share my screen. So this application is for the Oregon Aryamaga Okasati Refuge, also known as OAOR. They're a Buddhist hermitage. They're just outside of city limits, and they are applying to be annexed into the city. So this is the vicinity map. They're just off of Highway 211, just south of DeBarca Road. And their request is a type 4 annexation under the previous code. That's important because you probably remember in August, we adopted an updated annexation code, but this application was put in before that adoption. So we are reviewing this application against the standard of the previous annexation code. So in the former code, there are 3 types of annexation, A, B, and C. A is annexation in conformance with conceptual zoning designation, and then B and C respectively include a zone change and a plan map change. This one, they are not proposing a zone change or a plan map change, so it's a type A annexation. This is the conceptual zoning map. The yellow is low density residential, and the orange is medium density residential. The applicant is not proposing to change these zoning designations. The comprehensive plan designation of this site is village. And again, the applicant is not proposing to change it. There are 3 conditions for annexation to be approved. Typically, annexation goes to a vote by residents, but according to Oregon state statute, if it meets certain conditions, then it's up to the discretion of a city. So first is the site must be within the urban growth boundary, which this subject site is. The site needs to be contiguous with city limits. The property by itself is not, but they're proposing a section of the public right-of-way, and I'll talk about that. I'll show a map of that in a minute. And third, the request needs to be in compliance with the Oregon revised statute, which we've reviewed, and it is. So with the contiguity issue, the property by itself is not contiguous with city limits. On this map, the shaded area is city limits, and then that red area is the proposed annexation. So you'll see that they're proposing to annex a section of the Highway 211 and Market Road right-of-way in order to make the subject site contiguous with city limits. So it meets that second condition. There are a few annexation criteria. Any one of them being met allows for annexation, so it doesn't need to meet all of the criteria. It only needs to meet one. One of the criteria is a needed solution for existing problems resulting from insufficient sanitation, water service, or other urban service related problems. So back in 2017, the property owner at the time made an agreement with the city of Sandy to connect to Sandy's municipal water system. Can you wait to do that? Can you wait to do that? Sorry. So connected to the city's municipal water service, and in return, the city asked the property owner to apply for annexation into the city. So we determined that it meets this criterion. And then a second criterion that it also meets, even though it only needs to meet one, we determined it meets both of these: land for development to meet urban needs, and that meets a logical growth pattern of the city and encourages orderly growth. So you'll notice on this map that the subject site is within an unincorporated island, which it's generally good planning practice and good land use to try to decrease these unincorporated islands. An unincorporated island is an area that is surrounded by city limits, but is not within city limits. One thing that was brought to our attention was that the current property has a code enforcement violation. I called Clackamas County, and this is still pending, so it has not been resolved. The violations include operating their refuge without land use approval, addition to the mobile home without permits, grading and excavation without permits, and then gravel brought in to extend the driveway through the property without permits. I'm going to address a couple of, well, one of those in particular that's a little concerning at the end of the presentation, but that was brought to our attention and it's important to note. We received 2 public comments. The first one was in favor of annexing OAOR. We did have one comment that was from an adjacent property owner who had some concerns. They were concerned about the discrepancy between the survey that was supplied by the applicant and the parcel survey from the county. I believe what they're talking about is the Highway 211 and Market Street right-of-way addition to the survey provided by the applicant. Their second concern was land use incongruent with the underlying zoning district. Because of our LUPA, we're required to allow religious land uses on any underlying zoning district. Their third concern was an open violation with the county, which I just reviewed, and which I'll address in a second. And then concern about potential future developments, which the property owner did have a pre-application meeting with Clackamas County back in February, where they did list potential future development, but this application is not about development, it's simply for annexation. And then they were also concerned about traffic safety, which again is an unfortunate situation, but is not one of the criteria relevant to reviewing an annexation request. So our recommendation is to actually wait to forward a recommendation of approval to council until the applicant resolves the outstanding code violations, particularly for the unauthorized land use. That pre-app that they did back in February, just looking at the notes, it looks like that was to obtain a conditional use permit to be in compliance and to resolve that code violation, but we were unable to find any documents beyond that pre-app that showed that they were working on compliance with land use requirements. That's it.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
One procedural question, Shelley. You're recommending that we wait on forwarding a recommendation. That would imply this would have to come back to us sometime future?
I don't know if it needs to be processed as a continuance and have it come back. Kelly, do you know?
I mean, part of the issue is, so in our staff report, which was written and published last Monday, we didn't have the Clackamas County violations before us at that point. So Mr. I might pronounce his name wrong here, but Mr. Shellis, he's the one that actually in his public comments that he sent in brought up that there's an unresolved code violation. And at that point, Shelley started looking into it. I don't know when we received the code violations, but I think it was within the last few working days. And so it's actually come to our attention that it's not just a code violation, it's actually several, including the largest one, which is that the OAOR facility was never approved to be located at that site, which is a pretty big issue. So the whole reason why this is before you tonight is because OAOR, when they purchased the site, got city utilities extended to the site, and they signed an annexation agreement that at the time that the city requests annexation, that they can't remonstrate, that they have to actually go along with it because they got the utility extensions. So Mike Walker, our public works director, earlier this year requested to the applicant and the applicant's representative, Mr. Brown, that they do the annexation. So, you know, we decided that this was the right time and the public works director wanted to move forward with it. But then, just like I said, within the last week, we found out about these code violations that are ongoing with the county. And I don't think, unless our attorney feels differently, I don't think it would be correct to move forward with annexation without these being resolved. I also think that it could be a potential violation of the urban growth management agreement that we have with Clackamas County. I haven't had a chance today to look at that close enough, but I do think there's something in there that we're supposed to work cooperatively with the county on land use cases in the UGB that are outside of our jurisdiction. So I think it would most likely be a violation, or at the very least, it would not look very good that we would allow an annexation, taking this property out of their jurisdiction, and then basically their code enforcement violations would no longer be applicable. So I think the applicant has some work to do on trying to resolve these code violations prior to moving forward with an annexation. And so, yes, I think the most appropriate action at this time, unfortunately, would either be a denial, which I would hope we don't go that route, or would be, because the city's the one requesting the annexation to occur. So I don't really want to, I hope we're not considering denial. But the other way we could do it, I think, is to come back at a future date. The unknown part of that is I have no idea how long or how complicated it will be for the applicant to get approval for the religious facility there. So I don't know if we're looking at 2 months. I don't know if we're looking at 6 months. I really don't know what we're looking at. So David, do you want to kind of speak to that?
Yeah, so Kelly and I spoke on late last week about this, and I did look at the issue a little bit before tonight's meeting. So I sort of see it as two issues. And, you know, usually as most of you are aware, because you've seen a number of annexations, these are at least under the older criteria. The newer criteria are a bit different, but this is under the older criteria. You know, we usually don't get down into this level of, you know, uses and what's happening, what may happen. It's meant to be a very sort of 50,000 foot look at the property, and as Shelley said in her presentation, the criteria, particularly under the old standards, are very broad and just set the stage for coming into the city, getting it zoned under city zoning, and then recognizing that, like any other property, it would have the ability to develop according to the city standards in the future. So this one's trickier, obviously, because of the particularly the code issue under the violation that's pending, it sounds like, in the county. What I would say is, and the fact that the city is requesting it pursuant to an agreement, is maybe a little bit of a twist on how Kelly presented it. I do think it makes sense, and obviously, you know, we haven't heard from the applicant yet either. We want to do that, but my thought is that there would be continue the hearing at the very least to allow the applicant to have a further discussion with the county, frankly, to let the city have some discussions with the county, because I think I agree with Kelly, the point about the city's agreement with the county when it comes to what we call the urban growth management agreement is something we need to think about as well, and duties we have to the county under that agreement. But the way I kind of look at it is that ultimately what we could do eventually is either have a, if we had that discussion and the code issue is resolved, you know, then it becomes an easier, I think, recommendation from staff to you and you to the council. Or another alternative would be to say, basically, and this is kind of alluded to, I think, in the staff report, that we get something from the county that says either A, that the code issue is resolved to their satisfaction. I'm thinking a letter of some sort, or alternatively, that annexation itself to the city would resolve the code issue from their point of view. But that then leads to, I think, a question that we'd also want to address probably in the annexation, and I don't think it's been really looked at yet. And that is, if there is an operation that's happening on the property currently, and if it were to come into the city, do we have any idea whether the property owner would need to make a land use request with the city as well? I mean, would there be a land use approval that would be necessary under the city's regulations? So bottom line is, I think it, at the very least, a continuance maybe to next month, to allow some time to have additional discussions, both the applicant and the county and the city with the county. And I think we'd be in a bit better position to say, here's what we know is going on, and here's a way that, you know, we can go forward based on what we know.
Yeah, and Tad, one more wrinkle to that is that the gentleman, just one more thing to consider, is that the gentleman that brought up the concerns with the code violation, Mr. Shellis, he did point out in his letter that there's events that happen at the facility that have hundreds of people that attend. Now, that's probably pre-COVID is my guess. But so he did bring up some rather large concerns with traffic and parking. And if it never actually went through a conditional use process to get the permit, that means Mr. Shellis and other property owners never had the ability to comment on the land use proposal. So I do sympathize with Mr. Shellis that if that did occur and there was no land use procedure, that it then kind of took away the whole Goal 1 requirement in the state of Oregon of citizen participation, as it probably did not allow them to comment. So that's something I would like to find out from the applicant tonight, is what sort of procedure did they go through to get approval, and, you know, pre-COVID and, you know, eventually post-COVID, what sort of events are going to be held at this site, which I know is not what we would typically be asking in an annexation hearing, but I think it is relevant to the request tonight.
And Shelley, can I make just one clarification, at least for myself, and I think it may be beneficial for others as well. Is there a portion of the property, albeit a very small one, that is touching the current city limits, or not? I thought it from the map, it looked like there was a little bit of, if the red area is the property, that there was a little piece, I guess I would say, to the properties north that would be touching a southern city boundary, but I just wanted to clarify that piece.
There is one spot where it's diagonally contiguous. Yeah, but we were under the impression that that does not count for contiguity.
Yeah, I'm looking at the map right now, the property map on 2 sites that have property lines, so I'm not going to say they're all valid, but it says the property to their east has a little flag piece that goes up, and that flag doesn't look more than 50 feet wide. So you're right. I mean, there's not, if that flag is correct, there almost would be a road right away kind of a looking thing. But, you know, we have deviations for a lot of things. I mean, there's the northeast corner would be touching a piece of property within 75 feet. So kind of meets the intent.
Yeah, I didn't mean to muddle it. It was more of there was one of the slides that Shelley had in her presentation, and I was just trying to get clarity on that. That's kind of what that seems right, Dawn, like a flag piece, that I just didn't know if that portion of the flag actually was contiguous to the city limits, exclusive of the right-of-way. Anyway, maybe the applicant can speak to that as well.
I just checked on our GIS. That flag is not inside city limits.
Okay. Thank you. Good discussion, and we will move on to the applicant's presentation.
Gary, sorry to interrupt. Can I ask a question before we move to the applicant's presentation?
Okay, sure, Todd.
So I'm curious, and maybe somebody can help me out here, but it looks like we're completely missing the transportation piece of the annexation, because with the annexation, change from county zone to a city residential zone. So the transportation planning rule and all of that that's in the administrative rules seems pretty applicable. But I don't see anything about that.
Yeah, I can kind of answer that. So that we have never, since I've worked here, we've never done the TPR analysis for any property that was previously in the UGB. Saying that, we do require applicants to do it for any of the property that was brought in since 2017. But the property that was in the UGB prior to that, we have not done TPR analysis, as far as I'm aware.
Well, I feel pretty strongly that it's still applicable. And frankly, if you want to avoid a Bailey Meadows kind of situation, this is where that work is done, because this is an annexation. It's not a needed housing application, but after an annexation approval and it's residentially zoned, it would be then. So I hate to throw up a roadblock, but in my mind, now's the time to do that work to address the transportation planning rule.
Yeah, Kelly's right. The way that ODOT's looked at it, and I realize they're not the only agency that has authority over the TPR, but basically pre-UGB expansion properties, that was, if it's going from whatever the county zoning is to conceptual city zoning, the TPR was deemed to be factored into that work, essentially what the city's TSP spoke to. We've had that conversation. I understand your point, Todd. And I think technically you're right. It's just one of those things that with these older properties, we've had that discussion with ODOT, and they have basically given what I would call their blessing on that approach. That doesn't mean it's right, but that's what they've done in the past.
Okay.
But the point is that they'd have to, at some point in time, even if it's in the city, they'd have to do that work before it was developed.
It's different work, though. I mean,
Yeah,
Pardon?
if it was in the city and zoned and they came forward with a subdivision application, it's needed housing. So we're kind of back into that realm. Right now, it's not.
I see.
So
Yeah,
That's a fair point.
Yeah, they'd have to do a TIA, but they wouldn't have to do the TBR analysis. Yeah.
they do a TIA under our newly adopted code that takes out all the subjectivity. And if there are things like overloading local streets, I mean.
Well, maybe that's something that we, assuming that this goes.
Getting behind
Yeah.
that.
No, it's a fair point. Assuming this, I feel bad for the applicant because we're let them speak and let the public speak
Sure.
as well. But
I just wanted to raise it.
assuming we get to the point where we're actually going to have a continuance, I think that would be another thing that we'd probably look at.
Right. Thank you. I didn't mean to take over. I did want to raise it though, just to give them a chance to
It's a
respond.
very good point. Yeah, no, it's fair.
Thank you.
Are
Okay,
you ready?
I think now we can switch on the applicant for testimony, presentation.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, fine.
Okay. All right, good evening. I'm Tracy Brown. I live at 17075 Fur Drive, and I'm working with OAR on this application. So I was hired by the applicant in January of this year, and the first thing we looked at is we were aware there was some level of code violation with the county. And so we did approach the county and submitted an application for a pre-app to go through potentially a conditional use permit process. At this point, the applicant is really not wanting to do anything different than they're currently doing. They do have future plans, in the 5 to 10 year range to do an additional building as a gathering hall. And we understand when we talk to the county that would, have some significantly different requirements. So we went through the county pre-app, and then I approached the city because I became aware that the applicant or the property was connected to water in 2017 and also sewer in 2018. And I reached out to Mike Walker to request some information on where those utilities were so I could include those in the application to the county. And at that point, we received an email from Mike saying, well, you know, there's this agreement and we want you to annex to the city of Sandy under this 2017 agreement. So at that point, we, shifted gears to submitting a pre-application to the city of Sandy. And then we submitted the application for the annexation to the city of Sandy. You know, and I did reach out after I reviewed the staff report. You know, I wasn't really aware of what the code violations were. And from what I did talk to the code enforcement officer about those in quite a bit of detail. And there's three main things that need to be resolved. At least that's what he told me. One had to do with the placement of the manufactured home in 2006. And apparently the owner at the time didn't ever get that signed off on by the county. And so the county's just been holding on to that since 2006. The current property owner bought the property in, I believe, either 2007, I think it was 2018. So they inherited this manufactured placement. It never got final. The next thing is in 2017, current owner did a little bit of grading and started working with a contractor to do that, who was supposed to pull the permits, started the permitting on that, but never finished up on that permitting. And so I'm reaching out to the county to figure out what needs to be done on that permit. And then the third item that's listed in the code enforcement has to do with the sewer hookup permit. So as I mentioned, in 2018, the property owner's septic failed and they reached out to the city. And it's my understanding that the city actually put that in for them. You know, they paid the city for that and the city's contractor. And so the only thing that's outstanding in that regard is the kind of the finalization showing that the septic was filled properly and it's been decommissioned. And so we're working with the owner. I'm talking to the owner if they can find that paperwork, or we may need to reach out to the city to get that paperwork, because the city's contractor did the work on behalf of the applicant. So regarding the land use approval, you know, I did talk to the code enforcement about that, and he felt that, you can talk to him as well, but my understanding in talking to him is once those three items are, finalized, he felt comfortable submitting a letter to the city, essentially saying that they are closed out on this code violation. I guess there's, we're feeling a little bit like we're being whiplashed because we reached out to the county going through the process, and then the city said, no, you need to come to the city. And now the city's saying, well, no, you need to do a land use approval from the county. And, what I'm telling you is that in talking to the code enforcement, at least, they are comfortable for the land use application not being necessary if these other code items can be finalized. And I'm confident we can. I mean, two of them, if we had the inspection done on the manufactured home and the sewer hookup paperwork, those could be probably closed out in a few days. I'm not sure what's needed for the grading permit, so I'm still trying to get information from the county on that. So, I guess in terms of looking at the staff report, I was comfortable with the recommendation in the staff report and talking to the applicant that, wouldn't be annexed until that violation is signed off on by the county, essentially. And I'm confident we can do that. You know, I don't know, probably in the next month or two at the most, I'm confident of. You know, at least in talking to the code enforcement officer who's in charge of this with the county, he felt like, yeah, as long as you get those items checked off, he's willing to kind of pass it on, so to speak. I mean, I guess in terms of what the entity does, I'm not that familiar with their mode of conduct, but you know, there is a representative from the organization that can also talk about that. You know, as staff has mentioned, the code criteria are very general for annexations. The question of, is it contiguous to the city or not? I don't believe it is, unless that additional area has been expanded to include the right-of-way on the other side of Highway 211 to make it contiguous. And again, this is the map that was worked with by city staff to make the application submittable. You know, I had come up with a slightly different arrangement, and working with Emily, she made some tweaks to my initial proposal, and this is what you see today. I mean, I think my impression of looking at the code criteria is it's talking about, is it contiguous or can it be made contiguous? And this is certainly with this extension of annexed area, and it's fairly common to annex the right-of-way in front of a property. So it's not an unusual situation to do that. And so with that, then the property is contiguous. Otherwise, it's not contiguous, but it is in fact an island surrounded by unincorporated or incorporated property. So what I'd like to do at this point is ask Chris to kind of address maybe a little bit more of the operations of the organization, and if he has any additional input regarding the code violations. You want to go ahead, Chris?
All right, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So Tracy pretty much summarized about what we are trying to do. As far as OAOR is concerned, we bought the property for the intent first is to be a kind of a hermitage, which is basically residential for the monks. So obviously the plan is to, in the future, say 5 to 10 years from now, that depends on whether we have enough interest from the community as well as support, because basically the monastic or the monks all depends on from donation for anything that they do, including from all the cost of living as well as any other future development. So that is something that we hope that we can do, but that all depends, obviously, that we'll get say what's going to happen 5 to 10 years from now. So in terms of the current intent is to have the monk reside in the property, and then obviously their community will be coming in and either to get some kind of I guess interaction with the monks, because the way the Buddhists are, they could get instruction on how to do meditation and things like that, but there is no like kind of like, if you want to think of it as a church, we don't really operate that way. So there will be, on occasion, on a certain Buddhist day, kind of like a Christmas, you want to call that there will be maybe 100 or 150 people. I think maybe, hopefully in the future, we could even get to up to 200 or so. That's probably 1 time a year, and we'll do that. But most of the time, there is not even a schedule like a church where people come every Sunday and all that. There will be visitors obviously coming to the monk to go talk to them and get some advice on meditation as well as for some advice on their daily life. But that's the intent that we trying to do right now. So
Yeah, I would say that I haven't been out there for a couple months, but I know they did build a fence along their property line to try to screen their property from the adjoining property. I don't know where the individual that has expressed the concern is located, but they have constructed a nice fence along the majority of the property line on the north side. And they're definitely wanting to work, be a good neighbor with the property owners. As Chris mentioned, it's my impression that the majority of time is spent in kind of silence and meditation, and there's not a lot of loud activities that occur on the property. So I guess with that, trying to determine the path forward, I'm comfortable with the condition that's identified in the staff report, and I am confident that we can work out the issues with the county. And once those are worked out, I'm confident that they will, sign off on it from their perspective and their jurisdiction. So I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have of me.
I do have one point of clarification. Chris, can you give your address for the record?
Oh, I actually live in Olympia, so my address is 817 Leavenworth Avenue, Olympia, Washington. 817 Leavenworth, like the town's Leavenworth Avenue, Northeast. Olympia, Washington, 98506.
Okay, thank you.
I'm a member of the OAOR. So.
Okay, looks like we'll pause there and move on to public testimony. Just a few little instructions again and some new stuff. If you have any documents, maps, or letters that you wish to have considered by the body, they must formally be placed in the record of this proceeding. And to do that, either before or after you speak, email your materials to planning@ci.sandy.or.us, and staff will make sure that the evidence is properly processed. We will be doing testimony in three sections. We'll call for testimony in favor first, and then testimony against the proposal, and finally neutral. If you're on Zoom, just a reminder to raise your hand. You click the raise hand button and wait to be recognized. If you're on the telephone, it's *9 to raise your hand and wait to be recognized. So with those background instructions, we'll move to testimony in favor, excuse me, of the proposal. And as we've said, excuse me, before, when you begin, give us your name and your address.
You okay there, Jerry?
Yep. I should need some water, but we'll take a break in a bit.
Did you ask for proponent testimony, so those in favor?
Yes.
Okay, I don't see anybody raising their hands.
All right, then we will move to opponent testimony. If you are not in favor of the proposal, please dial in or click the raise hand button.
Okay, we have one person, Stephen Chellis. I'm gonna unmute them right now so they can speak.
Okay, and tell us your name and your address.
Sure. Hey, everyone. This is Stephen Chellis. Address is 38842 Southeast Highway 211. So if you look on the map, I'm the neighboring parcel with 485 feet of neighboring property line to the subject property. I guess I should start with, I wasn't sure if I should raise my hand here or neutral, but being that this opens up the currently zoned RRFF5 parcel to a future subdevelopment right next to my house, I decided to go now because, you know, Kelly mentioned this earlier, there's been no chance for us to say anything about this development because it hasn't gone through the proper channels with the county. So we're kind of having those channels, that opportunity here with the city to get to speak about this. So I appreciate it in that regard. And yeah, the stuff that I mostly talked about was, you know, I want to make sure this goes through due process. I think that's very important. Obviously, those zones exist for a reason. It's to protect neighboring parcels in the way of life and the privacy. We opened this meeting with an issue about apartments and privacy, and the answer was, well, it's zoned that way. They're allowed to do that, right? Well, this is zoned RRFF5. So by making this change, you open that door, and you open that door to the conversation that you guys opened the meeting with. So I just want to make sure that that's taken into account. Dawn, you mentioned that they had the developers have the right to develop that property, and that if someone buys property next to, you know, a parcel that's zoned that way, that's part of the due diligence process. And, you know, that's very important. I'm a realtor myself, and I did that due diligence when I bought my property, and that I made sure that it was RRFF5 over on that parcel. So that's important to me, and that's why I'm speaking up today. And the other thing I wanted to mention is I'm sure everyone in Sandy is familiar with how dangerous DeBarco in 211 is. There's currently not a guardrail right there because a truck went flying off of it a couple weeks ago. If you look up stuff, there's all sorts of things online about people who have had accidents with semis right there, right? So when you talk about 100 to 200 people coming from Sandy and crossing that double yellow line to get into OAOR, it creates a bit of an issue, and it's really close to another already known issue. So I think there needs to be some improvements there if this is approved to something like that. And I don't know who it was that mentioned possible transportation issues, and maybe this is grandfathered in under, you know, being that it's surrounded and within urban growth boundary, but those are some major issues, and I just don't want to see people get hurt, you know. I have a lot of people navigate by their phone, and they come right up my driveway and they sit there, you know, and not only block my driveway, but I've got a 3-year-old, she's running around, and there's people I live on a hill. If you guys have driven by, you can see the topography there. Nice cat, Ron, I like it. But you can see the topography coming up the driveway, and people get confused, and, you know, I understand that, but I have to physically block my driveway when these events happen. You know, you're talking 100+ cars coming in and out. It's usually about quarterly. And the other thing I want to mention is there's also people that volunteer there on a regular basis, 5 days a week. Sometimes there's some regulars, which is great. So yeah, I just wanted to make those statements. And I also you can see the information that I submitted earlier is included in the PDF. So thank you.
Thank you. Any others? Opponent testimony.
Sorry, when people stop talking, I disable them so they come off our screen. So that takes me a second. Just give it another second here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not seeing any other hands raised.
Okay. Then we will move on to neutral testimony. If you find yourself neither in favor or against, but just have a comment or concern to share one way or the other, now is your opportunity.
Chairman Crosby, I don't see any other hands raised.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. All right, we will move on to staff recap.
I guess just to review, I mean, it sounds like we're all in agreement that, you know, we want to make sure that this land use is in compliance with the Clackamas County's regulations. And it's, you know, it's important that the city uphold our agreement in the Urban Growth Management Agreement, UGMA. Yeah, and you know, and just making sure that we keep in mind that there are specific criteria to against which we measure annexation requests, and you know, just making sure that we're keeping those criteria in mind.
Yeah, I was going to add that Mr. Brown's correct that taking in right away is very common in annexation. So, you know, with what they submitted as far as the legal description of map, I have no problem with that portion of the proposal whatsoever. I think it's fine. If you remember when we annexed in the site there at Orient and Highway 26 where the new gas station's going in, we did a very similar thing there. We took in a large portion of Highway 26 and took in that property with it. So it's not uncommon, like Mr. Brown said. The other thing to keep in mind is I think once and I haven't even mentioned this to my supervisor yet, so this is the first anyone's hearing about it, but once the highway jurisdiction occurs of Highway 211 that was signed by council, once the city of Sandy assumes ownership of that, I would think at some point in the near future, we'll be looking at annexing in the entire highway that we just assumed responsibility for. I think that it would probably have to happen anyways since it's an urban facility, but regardless of that, just so we have jurisdiction of putting utility lines in there and so that the police officers can patrol Highway 211, I think we'd want to annex the entirety of it. So this kind of starts that anyways. This is a portion of Highway 211 that's coming in. So I think it's in line with the future goal of bringing in all of Highway 211 out to Gunderson Road as well. As far as the violation, it's an odd one. I will say that I've been involved in dozens of annexations over numerous cities and I haven't run into one with active code violations. I have run into things like the one we ran into a couple years ago about the historic building on it that we had to resolve with the county prior to annexing on Barnstead Road. Yeah, I mean, I do agree with Mr. Brown that a few of them seem pretty easy to resolve. The manufactured home siting thing, the septic tank decommissioning approval, the grading one I think could be a little more difficult. So I would want some clarification from the county in writing, committing to the idea that if those three things get resolved, that they don't have an outstanding land use compliance issue with the use. However, I think even if we do that, I think David was, Mr. Doofman was kind of suggesting this. I believe this is what he was suggesting, is that once it comes into the city, if it's never been approved for the use type, I think we would want to have a criteria or a condition of approval that they have to apply for. Sorry, there's a printer going on over here. They would have to apply for a conditional use permit or a design review or some sort of approval process. I'm going to mute myself because that's very...
Yeah, that was just to follow up on Kelly's point. So even the old annexation code spoke to, you know, what was considered to be existing non-conforming and what wasn't, and basically it tied it to, as I read it, a couple things. One, that there's no outstanding code issue, and then two, that to the extent any permit was necessary in the county, you know, a permit existed, and that I think that just gets to this point of if there is activity that's going on and that would continue to happen, you know, upon annexation, would that itself need to be reviewed for, you know, for a land use approval against the city's criteria? I think that just needs to be considered as part of a recommendation, at least.
Yeah, that printer stopped, so I was going to finish what I was about to say. I think, don't quote me on this, but I think it would be a conditional use permit to have a religious facility in the R1 zoning district. So I think even if we did allow the annexation, it would have to go through that procedure. The difficult part to me is that if we allow an annexation and then the conditional use permit for whatever reason was to be denied, I don't know what would then occur. So I don't know if the annexation would have to be contingent on approval of that conditional use permit. I'm just not too sure. I think I'd have to speak to David, and we'd have to explore the code a little bit more and also look at the UGMA a little bit more outside of this meeting. I don't think we're going to have anything for you tonight on how to resolve all that.
I agree with that, Kelly, and I also think then it's also, you know, a matter of talking about with the applicant too. I didn't appreciate that this was one that was mostly driven by the city as a result of the services agreement that exists. So I think in all respects, just, you know, at the very least for tonight, setting it over, and so we can start having those conversations, not the least of which is with the applicant as well, is to kind of figure out what the best path forward is here.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think if we continue, I think if we decide to go that route, I would rather not continue it to a date certain and just renotice, because I have no idea how long it's going to take to resolve all the issues and work through everything. And I just don't want to have an issue of going to a date certain when we don't know if that's even achievable.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Next is rebuttal. Tracy? Unmute yourself.
You can't
I'm
read
sure you
lips.
said great stuff.
Yeah, I admit it does feel like a little bit of a head scratcher. And it is, I mean, I feel like I now understand everything about it from the county's perspective, which I didn't understand prior. So it has been a back and forth. You know, the owner, you know, and I guess in response to the adjacent property owner, he mentioned, you know, it did not go through the proper channel. And, you know, this is the channel. This is the only channel that has been open to public testimony, you know, and we did, as was mentioned, we started preparing an application for a conditional use, which would have been noticed, but we were told by the city, no, we want you to come in, we want you to join us in the city. So, and that's what we did. We changed, you know, course 180 and submitted the application. So this is the opportunity right now. Sorry if you feel that it's, you know, something else has happened, but there was no, you know, code enforcement isn't something that's a noticed land use decision. So you would never have known anything about what's going on with the property. So anyway, that's, I guess, where we are. I mean, I guess we would agree that it, you know, it needs to be sorted out a little bit more before you make a decision. We would hate to have you, you know, deny this application because, and that, I don't know where that would leave the applicant, because the city's saying, well, you've got to annex. So I think it's better to, you know, press the pause button, and we don't have a problem that it's not a date certain if that's the city's comfortable with that. And so we can kind of sort out these questions with the city or with the county, you know, and I will be actively pursuing and getting the information necessary to sign off on those, you know, and as I mentioned, one of the pieces of information, the sewer or the septic, we may need to reach out to the city to get that, because the city was in charge of having the, you know, of the contractor who did that work. But other than that, it's, you know, it's kind of, we can pull that together, and there may be some additional information regarding the grading permit. At this point, I don't know, because I haven't seen what was submitted to the county. The only thing I know is they're waiting for additional information, and I don't know what that information is exactly. The county was closed all of last week to staff, and now I believe they're open to the public this week. So with that, people are back in the office, and it should be easier to get some of that information, and we can try to sort that out a little bit more. I don't know, do you want to add anything, Chris, to that?
No, I think that's pretty much summarized what we are trying to do the right thing. So that's why we pursue the conditional use permit with the county, because that's what they told us we need to do. So I guess, yeah, I will second about pausing that. And then, I mean, we'll get everything correct with the county, and then we'll go back to the city if that's what the commission here recommends. So that's pretty much where we are. And the septic, I think the correction on that one, the commissioning of the septic was done on a separate contract using the same contractor that was doing the sewer connection for the city. So we will work on that with that too, with them.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Do we need an official request for continuance, David, or it's been implied? Is that okay?
Yeah, it's from my point of view, it's fine. Annexations like this aren't ultimately subject to the 120-day clock, so the whole issue of the continuance is a little less pressing. And I think just by virtue of the discussion we had and Tracy's comments, it's fine to just go ahead and note for the record that basically we will likely be coming back to you at some point in the future after after the city renotices it with further information about the request.
Okay.
But the testimony and everything still applies, right, David?
Absolutely. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly everybody that participated tonight would also get notice of that as well.
Mm-hmm. Do any of the commissioners have any input, any comments that you'd like to add now? This will come back before us at a date uncertain. But does anybody have comments they want to get into the record? Chris, go ahead and unmute yourself.
I just had a question that was more procedural than it was about this. In a case like this, if we were to deny the annexation, how long before the applicant could reapply?
Well, it's kind of we're the ones requesting that they annex per the agreement. So I don't even know if they would want to reapply. If you get what I'm saying, like Mr. Brown mentioned, the reason why they're before us tonight is because the Public Works Director asked for the annexation to occur in compliance with the annexation agreement for the utility connection. So I don't know, David, what would you?
Maybe the question should be, does denying it cause any problem for a future consideration?
I don't think it would. As an academic question, no, I don't think it would. The code does have language about development proposals. Not if there's a denial, they aren't, reheard for a year, subject to some exceptions. But for the same reasons, it's not subject to 120-day clock. It's also not what I would call a development proposal. So I don't think it would affect that. No, but you'd also have to have I think a little clearer record before I'd recommend you go that route and be comfortable denying it.
Just trying to understand the process behind it. Thank you.
Yep.
I have kind of a process question, I guess, too, since David's up there. I took liberty to glance over here at a couple things. It's in the Bornted Village overlay. So we understand that. And it's currently zoned R1, as also the property to the north. Mr. Chalice's is zoned R1, at least for what you could ever build on. So then looking at the permitted uses, would I be correct in assuming that the current use would be considered a church?
Is that a question for me? I mean, based on my understanding, I think we would call it, a place of worship, maybe is a better term for it. Or
okay, but basically that's.
I think it ultimately, because I thought of the same thing as in the R1 and the R2, doesn't really call out any of that. It just talks about community service facility.
Right.
And when you go to the city's definitions, that lists, I think it says churches specifically or other similar uses. So I would think of it as I understand how it's been described, a community service facility.
Yeah, well, I hadn't quite made it to the definition, so thanks. So taking into the next step, if it were annexed, and then since they're operating it as a point of worship as opposed to a housing development, is it seem reasonable that right after annexation, then to continue to operate the place of worship, that they would need to come to the city and get a conditional use permit for that activity? Since they don't plan on building houses on it, that's what's going on.
Yeah.
So that was my next question, is if that's the next step, once it's, let's assume it comes into the city, that's an automatic assumption that there'll be another hearing, if you like, but it would be a conditional use for what they're doing. And the reason I ask that is because that kind of takes into account some of the concerns the neighbors have to the north with, if there's gatherings of 200 people or whatever. I mean, yeah, that's what churches do. They gather people. So then you go through all of those issues.
Yeah, it may very well. I think that also, though, weighs on, whether, I think I understand a little bit better that they had initially thought of doing that through the county, getting a conditional use permit, probably under similar regulations for this type of use, and then changed course to annex based on the city's request. So if they didn't have a county approval relative to the use, whether that's a conditional use permit or otherwise, then yes, I think they would need to get, likely, I mean, I want to know a little bit more about what they're doing, and it's part of the discussion I think we'd have over the following weeks, but they would likely need to get a conditional use permit to do what they're doing now in the city. But if they had that from the county, then that becomes a non-conforming piece that follows the annexation, according to your code.
Exactly. Yeah, that was my exact thoughts on it.
Well, that's my point, is I want to make sure we address the testimony that we had tonight. And it seems to me like the pertinent issue is how they're using the land, which is a place of worship. It's not anything else. And I understand that the city, provided the services and said, you got to annex. That said, I'm aware of areas that have gotten water from the city and were not required to annex. So probably wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, but the bottom line is they're following through on what the agreements were. So I just wanted to make it clear that it seems to me like there's going to be another application on this, if you like, or conditional use is going to follow if it comes into the city, and then we can address all of the transportation issues and all of those things, because you have something specific that you're addressing. You have something as opposed to not.
Mhm.
Yep.
I had kind of wondered the same thing on the sequencing of things. Ron?
Yeah, I don't really need an answer for it. I'm just still a little bit, not mystified, but I think Todd brought up a really good point about the traffic engineering studies and what impact that has. If it was a single family residential, would it be any different going into it? And then I'm still unsure if looking down the road in a number of years, if they happen to move out, sell the property, then it is R1. How would the ingress and egress be for people living there? So maybe I'm looking too far down the road, but I'm just looking at the different possibilities. But the traffic impact, I'm still not sure why that's not being addressed. So again, just not looking for much of an answer, just to have it out there, kind of along with Todd's thoughts.
Yeah,
I guess minor thought was, I want to make sure that Ron, that actually was addressed. My concern is I'm not sure what the transportation study would address, because you have to have some use to address. And so if you're addressing the zoning, which is R1, yeah, you can do that. But if that's not what's being proposed, it sounds like an academic exercise.
And it would come later, I would think, with any conditional use request. After annexations, wouldn't the transportation be analyzed then?
Yeah, you guys are talking about two different things. So Todd can explain this better than I can. Todd, do you want to explain it? I mean, you're the traffic engineer, I'm not. So why don't you just explain it?
Sure. So I don't know. It's my position that at the time of annexation, when it changes from the county's rural zone to the city's urban zone, is when you do that comparison about reasonable worst case development scenario. So since it's coming in as a residential zone, you look at the maximum allowable density under that zone and make sure that the transportation system can accommodate those impacts through the planning horizon. I think for David's point and Kelly, there's some presumption that that's already been done through prior TSP. I follow that, but I guess I have a difference of opinion there. Seems like now's the time to do that analysis for the annexation to establish the city zone. So then if they needed a conditional use permit for the proposed use, what they plan to do with the property, that'd be a different consideration, and they would do that at the time of a conditional use application. Or if years later they decided the use changed and somebody did want to subdivide it, there'd be another sub traffic study, whatever, how many years away that is, that would look at that specific impact. But at the time it comes into the city zone is when you'd look at that reasonable worst case.
And again, that's what I didn't mean to cut you off, Todd. That's what I was kind of trying to figure out is, are we looking at the annexation as a single family, as an R1 type of property? Okay. And then if that's one, then again, the conditional comes after that, but it's coming in as an R1 technically. Right. Is that right? Kelly, I guess I'm pointing towards you.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
You're saying there's nothing stating that 6 months from now they couldn't sell it and it could be redeveloped for residential development. Is that what you're kind of asking?
Yeah, and or just kind of what criteria applies. It's an R1 piece of property looking to be annexed.
Yep.
Okay.
I mean, the one thing I will mention is, maybe this will or will not make anybody feel better, but to me it does, is the one really positive thing with us, or one of the really positive things with the city taking on jurisdiction of Highway 211, is that over time we hope, one of our main goals with that is to, let's be blunt, to get ODOT out of the picture for redevelopment, so we have more local jurisdictional control over access to the highway improvements, and then hopefully as those things both occur, then we can convince the state to lower the speed limit so that you're not zipping through there at 65 miles an hour in an urban highway. So that's kind of the goal, is that over time, hopefully the access points will be controlled more by the city instead of ODOT. There'll be more frontage improvements that occur, and then that will be justification to then, when we do our study in the future, to lower the traffic, the speed through there.
Okay.
There's one minor little thing. Just if I'm just looking at the zone map, and why they did this, I don't know, but the little teeny piece of the southeast corner of the property is actually zoned R2. You know, most zoning tends to go down existing property lines, and why it doesn't in this case, I don't know, but it's just a little teeny bit that will be a headache when, if and ever we're developed in the residences. And what makes sense to you on that, by the way, I'm just looking at the map on Portland Maps, but the property to the east and to the south is all under one owner. It's called the Wonder Mobile Home LLC. It's a mobile home facility, basically, with part of the property not developed as mobile homes, but part of it is. So that meets the whole idea of the R2.
Okay, I need a first of all, we need to, well, if we're going to continue, we wouldn't close the public hearing. But is this technically a continuance, David? You kind of alluded to something.
Yeah, I think I see it as sufficient for your purposes, for the Planning Commission's purposes, Chair Crosby, just to recognize that you're not going to be making a decision tonight, and that the application, at least as we think this evening, may well come back to you at a continued hearing. And just recognizing that for the record is sufficient. We would re-notice for that. So there's nothing, I think, affirmative you have to do to, continue the hearing to a date certain. I think it would stay open. I don't think you're closing anything. It's sort of we're holding it open, and there's not really a known time when you would pick it back up. When you would be subject to basically a re-noticing at that point.
So
do
we continue it, period? Do we just continue it, period, without a date certain?
Yeah, I think that's fine. Exactly. I think you can just say the matter is continued, and that you would hear it again according to a new date that city staff would provide new notice for. It doesn't have to be very formal though, because when we're doing it, usually a continuance to a date certain, we're having it through a motion, so it's very clear for the record that you don't ever have to do that notice again. Here we're already acknowledging that notice will be provided. So I think just a statement to the effect of we're going to continue it, and we would pick it up at a future hearing is fine.
So we don't need a motion.
No, I think just having a statement for the record that acknowledges that's what's happening is sufficient.
Okay, and sufficient for me to make that statement?
Yes.
Please.
Make the statement, Jerry.
Is that a plea? All right. He will make the statement that we will not be making a decision on this matter tonight, and which is, I'll look it up here, 20-025, the annexation, OAOR annexation. We will not be making a decision tonight, for the record. It will come back to us at some future date after some of the issues have been cleaned up. And then we will pick it up from there and do our duty to move it on to City Council.
Works.
Okay, that was strange.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that.
We learn more about process again tonight.
Yeah, never done it that way. Okay, well, we've done all our talking, I think, already.
I'll make the motion, we close our meeting. I think we're done.
I second it.
Well, is there anything Kelly needs to tell us, even though we've had his talking? What do we have in October at that meeting, Kelly? We have the work session, and then what?
The continuance of Bull Run Terrace.
And you sent out an email, had something to do with it's taking a little bit longer with a planned development. So is that coming up, or?
Oh, that'll be in November. That was going to be tonight. Thank God it wasn't, because it's already 9:15. So that will be in November.
Okay.
So besides the work the work session, that's a good point to clarify. The work session will begin at 6 next month. Hopefully we'll get out of there by 6:50 to allow everybody to have a 10-15 minute break. And then we'll reconvene at 7, and then we'll have the one hearing is all we have. But it's a pretty large one, so.
Kelly, I have one more question. I forgot to ask. Because I'm in midterm of somebody's position or seat, how long are the terms if I were to apply again? Are they 1 year, 2 year?
They're for the rest of your life once you're on here. You can ask Jerry Crosby that.
Well, wait a minute. I thought we had to apply to reapply so they could kick us off if they wanted.
They're 4 years. 4 year.
I think
They're 4 years?
Yeah. It's a commitment.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a long time.
What's
All right.
well, but what's funny
That's
is the
good.
way they're set up is they're 3 on one and 4 on the other. You think they'd be more staggered, like
Hey,
2, 2, and 2.
We've talked about redoing that, so it'd be 2, 2, 2, 1. Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's 3 and 4 is pretty bizarre how we have it.
I don't know. 4 might be necessary. I think I joined March of 19, and I think I'm just starting to understand the language a little better now.
No, that's normal. That's normal.
It's just like learning's a doing experience, Chris. So
That's why you actually become more valuable with each meeting. The process. Well, it has been moved by Ron, seconded by Paula to adjourn. All in favor?
Adjourn.
Say aye. Wave your hand. Hit your leave meeting button. We'll see you next
Chris,
month.
you're frozen. Are you saying yes?
I'm saying bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Kelly.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Shelley.
What are you, Ron, getting dogs and cats and everything?
Yeah, we are kitten sitting.
Nice.
And so, yeah, my wife wants to give it up now.
Okay, have a good night.
You too, Kelly. Bye-bye.